difficulty in her hearing us. So I think she might be signing out to log back in.
Okay, great. Okay. Okay, so I've got everything from the
Good afternoon, everyone. It's noon, about 36 participants on today's September Transportation Planning Board meeting. So quick reminder, please mute your lines when not speaking to reduce any background noise. We are recording and streaming today's meeting, recording for our own reference and minute preparation, and streaming to the public on our website. We will hold tight for the chair to re-sign in, and then at that point, we'll go ahead and get the meeting started. Thanks so much.
I believe I'm having some technical difficulties. Hello.
Hi, Chair Russell. We hear you loud and clear. Can you hear that?
Auntie?
Yes, can you hear us, Ms. Russell? We hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining us. 12:02. Looking to get some audio connections figured out. And
Hey, Conti, I'm trying to call in now. Mm-hmm. The conference call isn't picking up.
Okay, we'll just take a minute to set it up. So, Ms. Russell, are you using the 650-479 number?
I apologize.
Oh, okay.
There we are.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Russell. You may want to just turn on the mic of your computer on mute and speak through your telephone. That would be great. Thanks.
Yes. Can you hear?
Hi, Ms. Russell. Let's give that another go. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Can you try speaking?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, loud and clear. No echo because I went ahead and mute your mic. Yeah. Oh, good.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. So, good afternoon, all. Kelly Russell here, your Transportation Planning Board Chair. I call the TPB September 16th, 2020 meeting to order. I really hope you were able to take some time off this summer. It's been quite a challenging year, and I do hope for better times this fall. As you'll recall, in addition to live audio streaming, this virtual meeting is being streamed on YouTube. essentially the screen we are seeing on our computers, and the audio of our discussions are being broadcast. You'll recall that we used to have an actual audience of residents and staff during our in-person meetings. This broadcast on YouTube is another way to reach out to this audience and to others. Okay. For the benefit of those watching us virtually, I'll briefly review the procedures we'll be following during the meeting. For my colleagues on the board, please keep the email you received from Conti handy, as I did, as it has useful information on participating in the meeting and, importantly, the process to follow in case of any technical disruptions during the meeting. First, I will ask Lynn to take the roll call of members or alternates to document your presence at the meeting and determine that we have a quorum. For action items, I'll have the presenter complete their presentation and then invite a motion to adopt the resolution. I'll then invite a second on the motion made. Please remember to unmute and state your name while making or seconding a motion. I'll then invite questions from the members, in turn by jurisdiction. Thereafter, for your vote, I will ask only for nay votes or abstentions by jurisdiction. The rest of the votes from those present will be assumed as yes votes. For informational items, I'll have the presenter complete their presentation, and then I'll invite questions by jurisdiction. Lastly, a friendly reminder to unmute your mic and state your name and jurisdiction when you speak, and then remember to remute when you are finished. Okay, Lynn, we're ready for the roll call to confirm we have quorum.
Great, thank you, Ms. Russell. So I'm going to go down the list, and if you could please state your name, I will ask about your agency or your jurisdiction. So let's start with the District of Columbia. City Council Member Phil Mendelson. City Council Member Charles Allen.
Good afternoon, I'm here.
Thanks. DC City Council Member Brandon Todd.
This is Sam Stevens, his alternate.
Great, thank you. District Department of Transportation.
Leslie Rupert is here. Thank you.
Yep. District Office of Planning.
Kristen Calkins is here.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to Maryland. City of Bowie.
Adrian Boafo with the City of Bowie is here.
Thank you. Charles County.
Jason Groth, alternate here.
Thank you. College Park.
Patrick Nguyen is here.
Denise Mitchell, alternate, is here.
Great, thank you both. Frederick County. City of Frederick. Miss Russell, I'll go ahead and mark you present. City of Gaithersburg.
Dennis Enslinger's here as the alternate. I thought Neil was going to be here, but maybe he had something come up.
So I probably should have said this earlier. I will be monitoring the participants list and capture you if I miss you. So if Neil does show up, I should be able to get him. If not, feel free to write in the chat or email me and we'll make sure you're counted. City of Greenbelt. City of Greenbelt. City of Laurel. Montgomery County Executive.
Gary Ehrenrich is here.
Thank you. Montgomery County Legislative. Prince George's County Executive.
Terry Bellamy.
Thank you. Thank you. Prince George's County Legislative.
Hi, this is County Councilwoman Denny Tavares. I'm having problems with my video. I may have to pop out and pop back in, so through another service provider, another browser.
Okay, hopefully you won't miss much.
All right, thank you.
City of Rockville.
Bridget Newton, I'm here.
Thank you. Tacoma Park.
Casey Kostick.
Thank you. We don't have a member from the Maryland Senate. Maryland House of Delegates.
Mark Corman is here.
Thank you. And I saw Ms. Krim, so I'm going to mark you here because I saw you.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Yeah. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Yes, Earl Lewis is here. I'll be dropping off at 1, and Jeff Hirsch will take over.
Okay, great. Thank you. Virginia, we'll go down Virginia now. City of Alexandria.
Present.
Is this Mr. Aguirre?
It is. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Arlington County.
Christian Dorsey is present.
Thank you. City of Fairfax. Fairfax County Legislature.
This is James Walkinshaw from the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors.
Thank you. And I also, just for your information, Mr. Acorn will be here in a half an hour. So I'm
actually, Walter Alcorn is here, Fairfax County Board of Supervisors as well.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Falls Church.
Dave Snyder here.
Great. Fauquier County. Loudoun County.
Kristen Umstadt is here.
Alternate Bob Brown is here.
Thank you. City of Manassas.
Pam Sebesky is here.
Thank you. Manassas Park.
Jeanette Rischel's here.
Thank you. Prince William County.
Ann Wheeler is here.
Thank you. Prince William County. Anyone else? Okay, great. And we have 2 vacant seats from the Senate and the Virginia House of Delegates. So then I will move on to our other agencies. WMATA.
Allison Davis is alternate is here.
Thank you. And
is here from Virginia DOT. I think I was skipped. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Anyone else from Virginia DOT?
No, that's it.
Thanks. Our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration. Federal Transit Administration. National Capital Planning Commission. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. And lastly, National Park Service.
Tammy Stidham is here for National Park Service.
Thank you. And did I miss anyone?
Hi, Lynn. Emmett Jordan from the city of Greenbelt. I'm here.
Thank you. Great. Okay, Madam Chair, that concludes our roll call. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I do understand that we did receive one brief public comment. Lynn, can you read that into the record for us, please?
Absolutely, yes. So as Ms. Russell said, we received one public comment through our email. This comment was from a person named Danielle, and I can't pronounce her last name, so I will spell it, Celdran. And it reads, I live in Greenbelt, and I support the no-build option for maglev because I want investment in transit that serves our local communities, not an exclusive train that passes us by. Sincerely, Danielle Cauldron, and she's listed as 121 Hedgewood Drive from Greenbelt. That concludes our public comment.
Great. Thank you so much, Lynn. We're on to the approval of the July 22nd, 2020 meeting minutes. May I have a motion to adopt the minutes? And remember to state your name and jurisdiction.
So moved. Pam Sebesky, Manassas City.
Second from Jeanette Rischel, Manassas Park.
You guys heard a motion from Manassas and a second from Manassas Park. Any corrections or comments on the meeting minutes? Okay, for the vote then, remember to state your name and jurisdiction, and we're only going to take abstentions or nays from the District of Columbia. Maryland, Virginia, and WMATA or other federal agencies. Hearing no abstentions or nays, the minutes pass. Thank you. We're on to the technical committee report. We do have a written summary of our technical committee's September 4th meeting, but we also have Kyle Nemhart, chair of our technical committee, here. So Kyle, is there anything that you would like to report or highlight for us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chair, committee, I'm happy to see the board on items that the tech committee has had the opportunity to review and discuss prior to being presented to the board. The tech committee was briefed by Brian Hayes on the update to the TPB's public participation plan that has been released on August 25th for public comment. And Mr. Hayes will be presenting that to the board following input provided by the tech committee last week. We also were briefed by Eric Randall on the performance-based planning and programming transit safety draft targets, and he will also be presenting that to the board as well. And the board will be asked to approve those regional targets at the November meeting. We were also briefed by Nicholas Ramphos on the regional employer telework survey results that did generate quite a bit of conversation amongst the committee. And this included a rhetorical discussion of the implication for current planning strategies and which focus on growth and increased mobility. And Mr. Ramphos will also be presenting that to the board today. That concludes my briefing to the Transportation Planning Board on behalf of the TPB Tech Committee. And with that, I will gladly turn it back over to you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Do we have any questions for Kyle?
I do have a question, Madam Chair. This is Casey from Tacoma Park.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I noticed in the minutes from the technical committee report that there was a report on the impact of COVID, and I'm sorry if you mentioned this, my audio was a little spotty during your presentation, but I was really curious about the report, and I think it seemed to have a lot of really useful information in it. So I was wondering if it would be possible for us as a board to have a briefing on those findings in the future.
Yes, Ms. Kostic, this is Kanti Shrikant. We do plan to bring a series of briefings to the board as we have been compiling and collecting and analyzing the information on travel trends and travel impacts during the current pandemic. Today, we plan to present under agenda item 11 the results of a survey that was done of employers in the region about their teleworking, not just how they have been managing and using teleworking during the current pandemic, but importantly, what their plans and expectations are for a post-pandemic period. So that's what we plan to present today. We are working with state highway agencies and local and regional transit agencies on getting better information and a better handle on what the service levels have been and what the utilization of those service levels are. And then we are also collecting data on actual traffic volumes and travel speeds and what have you. Because of the multifaceted items on that agenda, it's quite not ready yet to be brought, but it is absolutely in the plans and in the works to be brought to the board. As Kyle was saying, the preliminary approaches that we had taken identified a whole host of different data sources, was shared with the tech committee. The tech committee gave us some feedback. We got some feedback from transit agencies as well, and that's the work that we are currently working on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kanti. Are there any other questions for Kyle? Okay, great. Thank you very much. We haven't had a real tech committee report for a while, so I feel like we're getting a little bit back to normal here-ish. Now we're on to the Citizens Advisory Committee report, and I'm going to invite Nancy Abeles, the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee, to share her summary of the committee's discussions this month. We do have a written report also of the September 10th meeting. Nancy, take it away.
Thank you, Chair Russell, and good day, everyone. The 2020 CAC met for an online meeting on Thursday, September 10th. And at the meeting, we discussed two items on today's agenda: the participation plan update and the implementation and 2022 update of the Visualized 2045 Long Range Plan. And the group is also briefed on potential future updates for its own mission and activities. We also heard about the TPB Equity Resolution. Carmen Armendariz, TPB Public Involvement Specialist, shared details about the TPB Equity Resolution approved by the TPB in July. The committee encouraged staff to continue thinking about how to implement the resolution to ensure that all groups have a voice at the TPB. The CAC sees equity as a historic priority and is committed to working with staff to make the TPB and its activities as accessible and equitable as possible. Next, we heard about the TPB participation plan from Brian Hayes, TPB Transportation Planner. He briefed the committee on the public comment period for the TPB participation plan and said that the 45-day public comment period started on August 25th and ends on October 9th. He walked the group through comment submission options on TPB's website and encouraged us to review the plan and submit comments, with the additional possibility of the CAC submitting a comment collectively. The committee suggested that staff work with elected officials and public information officers to get the word out about the comment period, seeing it also as an opportunity to make the public more aware about the TPB and its work. Next, we heard from Stacy Cook, TPB Transportation Planner, about Visualize 2045 implementation and 2022 update. She briefed us on staff visits to each of the jurisdictions to support implementation of Visualize 2045 and also informed us of plans for the 22 update. The committee was curious and vocal about how the COVID-19 public health emergency might impact the 2022 plan update, as well as impact future long-range transportation plans in general in terms of both need and funding, and how various travel modes interact. With this in mind, the committee encouraged the TPB to ask Congress for more money to fund WMATA, so that post-pandemic, the region's economy and livability can more resiliently recover. Other business, Lynn Erickson, TPB Plan Development and Coordination Plan Program Director, walked the committee through the September TPB agenda for today. Then Brian Hayes reminded us that staff are discussing possible updates to CAC committee recruitment and structure changes for the first time in 20 years. The committee provided input on things that we feel work well, including some advantages of meeting technology, such as we're using now, and we provided advice on how to make the committee more accessible to new members. The CAC is cognizant of contributions to TPB policies and activities that past and recent committees have provided through the years. We support changes and enhancements to ensure that future committees and their activities amplify these efforts. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions or comments. Chair Russell?
Thank you very much, Chair Willis. That was a great report. Are there any questions? Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So while the Access for All Advisory Committee did not meet in July for us to get its report, I do understand there is some news from the AFA that our colleague Casey Kostick, chair of the AFA, would like to share with us. Casey?
Yes, there is. And sadly, I do have very sad news. One of the members of the AFA passed away last week. Charlie Crawford was a longtime member of the AFA and a lifelong transit and disability advocate, really important part of our important member of our committee. He passed away last week at home with his wife and his seeing eye dog. And I just wanted to give a little brief information about him and some of the work that he did. He was, in addition to serving on the AFA, he also was the former, he also served as AFA's liaison to WMATA's Accessibility Advisory Committee. And he also served previously on the former TPB Human Service Coordination Task Force. He was involved with the TPB in various ways for almost 10 years. He was also founder and first president of the American Council for the Blind's Massachusetts affiliate and was executive director of the American Council of the Blind in the DC National Office. He additionally was the past vice chair of the Montgomery County Commission on People with Disabilities. And within the AFA, he was a tireless advocate, always present at our meetings, a very positive force for change, and someone who will be very greatly missed at our meetings and as an individual as well. So We're very much going to miss him, and I'm sorry to bring this very sad news, but I wanted to share a little bit about his contributions and his life. Thank you.
This is Vic Weisberg. If I may just add for a second, Charlie was a neighbor of mine, and just adding to what Casey said, he was just such a stellar pillar of our community, the ADA community, and was just one of the most decent and humble people that I knew, and losing him is a huge loss. So I just wanted to add to what Casey had to say.
Thank you, Casey and Vic, for those really heartfelt comments. On our condolences to his family and friends and colleagues, and of course all those whose good works and whose lives were touched by his good works in the community. I did not know him, but he obviously will be missed. So thank you very much. Rest in peace, Charlie. All right, on to the steering committee actions and report of the director. We have a written summary of our September 4th steering committee meeting and a report from our staff director, Conti. Is there anything that you would like to add or highlight, Conti?
Thank you, Ms. Chairman and members of the board. You all have in your online packet a memo from me, so I won't go over it. While I will like to draw your attention to all items in the memo and happy to respond to any questions, I would like to draw your attention to two items, one starting on page 31 and the second one on page 49. On pages 31 through 44 are the slides that Chair Russell used in her remarks to the Maryland's House of Delegates Transportation and the Environment Subcommittee meeting that was held on August 13th, 2020. Chair Russell was invited by the committee chair, Delegate Mark Corman, who is a member of the board, and also co-chaired by Delegate Carol Krim, who is an alternate member of the TPB. So thank you both, Delegate Corman and Delegate Krim, for the opportunity for Chair Russell to come and share some of the TPB's work. The committee was exploring the current experience with teleworking, alternate work schedules, and what teleworking means as a strategy to address congestion during the commute periods in Maryland moving forward. The chairman of the Baltimore MPO was also invited, and she too presented her works and her remarks to the committee. Chair Russell provided some background information of the TPB's work in travel demand management in general and teleworking in particular that's been going on since 1995. She also shared the findings from the most recent State of the Commute survey, which was in 2018, and as well as the just completed survey of select employers this year from July, which we will be getting briefed on later on under agenda item 11. The gist of Chair Russell's remarks was that in the National Capital Region, there's been a very healthy level of teleworking leading up to the pandemic. On any given day, about 10% of the weekly commute travel is avoided because people are teleworking on any given day. And about 35% of all the commuters in the region have teleworked at least on occasion. So that's where we start from. But there is also a very high proportion of workers in our region who do have telework suitable jobs. They would like to telework, but they are not teleworking. This is almost 25% of the commuters in our region. So Chair Russell noted that teleworking and travel demand management is one of the TPB's aspirational initiatives. She noted that while teleworking has been growing in the National Capital Region, it's been growing at a very small, slow pace, about 1.25% per year for the past 15 years. But right now, there is an opportunity to get this teleworking on a regular basis to the next level. But that would require a commitment on support from state governments, local governments, more resources, both in terms of funding and policy support, and importantly, coordination at the regional level. She did note that telework in of itself will not be able to solve all of the current congestion problems, particularly the growth in congestion that the TPB's long-range plan is indicating, because there is going to be growth in population and jobs in the region. Then on to page 49. This is a save the date notification for the TPB's work session on climate change planning. You will recall that in January, the board announced climate change as one of the focus areas for this year. The work session in October will present a new interim year greenhouse gas reduction targets that is currently being developed for the COG board by COG's Climate, Energy, Environment Policy Committee. The TPB will receive some details during the work session, but at the same meeting in October, they will be asked to consider endorsing this 2030 interim year greenhouse gas reduction target. Transportation is one of the primary contributors for greenhouse gases. The work session will also include the latest status report on the work of a 13 jurisdiction consortium in Northeast and Mid-Atlantic USA. That's called the Transportation Climate Initiative. This group is working to identify what actions can be taken within the transportation sector to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I'm happy to report that Maryland Department of Transportation is serving as the co-chair of this group, and Earl Lewis is serving in that capacity. So that's what was in the online packet. And if I may, Ms. Chair, there was an addendum to this packet that was posted to the meeting material website, and that's available to those who are observing this meeting virtually on the website. This is a memo from Andrew Meese, your staff, noting that earlier this week, a public-private consortium led by a Greater Washington Partnership released the results of their inaugural survey of employers in the region, asking what the employers' plans were to return staff to the office, meaning when were they planning to bring employees back to the work sites, to the offices. We assisted them in this effort, so did WMATA. On our part, we collected information from the transit agencies about their plans to increase transit service, and we made that information available to the employers as they were considering the timing to return to their offices. We want to make sure that they were aware of what transit plans were in terms of adding capacity. And I want to thank all the TPB member jurisdiction staff who helped us with this transit information. As part of this, Greater Washington Partnership has also developed and made available on their website a transit tracking tool. It's a very interesting tool, an informative tool that provides the transit service levels and usage that's available. We will definitely plan to bring future updates. I understand they plan to update this once every 2 months or so. So that's the latest additional memo that was added after the mail-out packet was sent last week. Those were just the points I wanted to bring to your attention. Thank you, Ms. Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Kanti. Are there any questions for Kanti? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the chairman's remarks. So in January, I began an elected term as chair of this esteemed body, and with your support, we did set 3 key focus areas for 2020. Increasing road user safety, improving access to transit and active transportation in the region, and climate change, as just mentioned. Little did we know that we would face the personal and public health pandemic that we are still living through now, and that we would also experience the social awakening and reckoning of racial inequities that will influence everything that we do moving forward. A little past the midpoint of this year, as I take stock of the board and what we have been able to do on the 3 priorities, plus the additional 2, the pandemic and race relations, I do see some great progress, but also know that there is more work to be done. Each of you deserves to be recognized for your active participation, providing support to your own staff and our staff here at TPB. To our Citizens Advisory Committee, Access for All Advisory Committee, and our Technical Committee, and really all the subject matter subcommittees. You've stayed focused on these important issues and have turned the challenges into opportunities to improve the region's transportation planning and programming, and I thank you for that. In July, we reached a couple of major milestones. On road user safety, we adopted a resolution reaffirming our commitment to safety, identifying a set of strategies for us to implement, and importantly, creating a new annual regional safety technical assistance program. On transit access and active transportation, again in July, we adopted the transit access focus areas and the National Capital Trails Network. This is just the beginning of the work to realize all the recommendations on these two. We will continue to be engaged in this work. On the third focus area of climate change, we will have a special 90-minute work session ahead of the board meeting next month. Conti provided the gist of the purpose of this meeting, and I do hope that you will make plans to attend. Finally, on the topic of equity, I am excited to let you know that in partnership with the COG board, we will be hosting a series of 5 virtual town halls for local government officials. This is a direct outcome of the equity statement we adopted in July, as did the COG board. The title of the series is Leaning into 2021, More Equitable, More Resilient. I sent you an email about this 5-part monthly series, which begins this Friday. I encourage you to make time to participate in these sessions. For the first session, our dynamic speakers will detail disruptive demographic trends that have been emerging well before this year, but have been magnified by the COVID-19 pandemic and our national reckoning on race. For the TPB to truly advance equity, including every debate we have and every decision we make as the region's MPO, it is important for us to have a common understanding of the nature of this challenge and the strategies to build a more resilient and more equitable community. If any of you did not receive the email, please check the chat box, as I have asked staff to send you the link to the website where you can register. And I do hope to see you there. All right, on to the action items. First item is to amend the FY 2021-24 TIP to update projects and funding in the District of Columbia section of the TIP as requested by DDOT. And we have Leslie Rupert from DDOT to brief us on this action. Leslie?
Thank you, Chair Russell. Good afternoon. This is Leslie Rupert with the District Department of Transportation, as she just introduced. And DDOT is requesting an amendment to the fiscal year 21-24 Transportation Improvement Program to update the listing of projects, the project details, and funding information for all 4 fiscal years of the TIP. We introduced this amendment to you as a notice item at the July 22nd TPB meeting. And the proposed amendment reduces funding in the 4-year program by approximately $200 million from $1.87 to $1.67 billion. And that detail is found in the financial summary on pages 10 and 11 of the posted materials. This amendment aligns our program with DDOT's current budget process. The amounts of all federal district sources are within the budget of federal formula funding and revenue streams projected to be available in the fiscal constraint requirement for the TIP. The projects in the amendment were either included in the air quality conformity analysis of the 2020 amendment to visualize 2045 and the fiscal year 21-24 TIP, or they are exempt from conformity requirements. This amendment was posted for a 30-day public comment and interagency, review period on July 16th, and no comments were received from the public on this amendment, which Andrew let me know that is not unusual. DDOT is not submitting any corrections following that review time period. So with that, I would like to move approval of the TPB resolution R6-2021 to approve the TIP action 21-06, a formal amendment to the fiscal year 21-24 TIP. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion by Ms. Rupert. Do we have a second?
This is Charles Allen from DC.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Are there any questions or comments? And we'll start with the District of Columbia. How about Maryland? Virginia?
Madam Chair, Christian
Wamata?
Dorsey from Arlington. I'd just like to
Yes, sir.
make note of the useful projects that do positively affect our region, and in particular Arlington County as it relates to Long Bridge and the Roosevelt Bridge. So we appreciate the District of Columbia moving forward with these in light of constrained funding realities. We really think that this is important and applaud you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from Virginia? And WMATA or other federal agencies? Okay, I'm just going to ask for nays or abstentions. I don't think we need to go by jurisdiction. Are there any nays or abstentions? All right, motion carries. Thank you so much. We're now on to information items. We're going to start with the participation plan update. I understand that staff is working to update our public participation plan document. The document is guides staff on how best to encourage participation in the TPB process and provide opportunities for the public to be involved with the metropolitan transportation planning process. Ryan Hayes will provide us with the details.
Thank you, Chair.
Brian?
Good afternoon.
Take it away.
Thank you. Yes. Good afternoon, Board. My presentation today summarizes more than 10 months of staff work. It's going to be really quick in just a few minutes. In this presentation, I will introduce you to the purpose of the participation plan and provide some historic and regional context. I will describe what is new in the plan and share staff's approach for updating the plan. I will also highlight a couple of ways that the plan seeks to implement the equity resolution that the board approved in July. Finally, I will talk briefly about the public comment period, which is currently underway. Next slide, Sergio. So one of the first things that we did when updating the plan was to clarify the purpose of the participation plan. Federal regulations guiding metropolitan planning require metropolitan planning organizations like the TPB to have a participation plan. But beyond that requirement, why do we need this document? Based on internal staff discussion and input from the CAC, AFA, and technical committee, we decided that the purpose of the participation plan is to guide staff interactions with the public so that staff can reach as many people as inclusively as possible and collect meaningful input to build support to inform TPB plans, programs, and aid in decision-making, right? This document exists so that staff can get you, the board members, the information that you need from public perspectives to make the decisions that we ask you to make every month. Next slide. The first TPB participation plan was approved by the board in 2007. The plan was updated and approved by the board again in 2014. These two versions of the participation plan asked staff to recognize the TPB has different public audiences or constituents, and that the staff need to call upon different tools to reach those different groups. That there's no one appropriate way to reach everyone. We really need to recognize differences and reach people appropriately. It is important to remember also that the TPB participation plan is only one of the documents in the region that guides how governments and agencies interact with the public. So most of your jurisdictions or your agencies have public participation or public involvement plans. And this is just one in kind of this regional context. Next slide. Okay, so what is new in the 2020 update? This update builds upon the previous iterations of the plan. First, the participation policy is the foundation of the plan. It states that the TPB believes that public input into its products is valuable and makes its products better. The policy includes goals and constituencies for engagement. New this year, we are policy principles. These principles guide staff interactions with the public and point towards the goals without specifying kind of how to achieve them, right? The principles are 5. They are equity perspective, plain language, early and continuing participation, timely response, and clarity of purpose. Also new in this plan is something we're calling the staff guide. This chapter provides staff with a workflow that they can follow, and it will assist them as they plan their work, right? In addition to asking staff to consider the public impact of their work and the existing federal regulations, this workflow also calls upon staff to be thoughtful about how they make sure their work is equitable and accessible to people living in the region. There's also a public guide, which is for members of the public. It is really the chapter that connects the people in the region with opportunities to get involved. We have a number of ongoing opportunities to get involved at the Transportation Planning Board. But this chapter also reminds people that maybe the place where their input can have the biggest impact is locally at the county, city, and state levels as projects are being developed, right? And finally, there is a federal guide or chapter that shows kind of not only that we're meeting, but also exceeding federal requirements. Next slide. So as we were drafting this, this plan, we anticipated that in July, the TPB would pass an equity resolution. So we decided to delay the participation plan public comment period by 1 month so that we can make sure that the draft plan includes that resolution and reflects kind of the intent of the resolution. Equity has always been an important part about how TPB staff think about their interactions with the public. 10 months ago, when we were getting started, our goal was to make the commitment to equity even clearer than it had been in previous plans. Recent actions by the board really strengthen that commitment to equity. So this commitment is reflected several places in the plan. Here are just 2 examples. First is the policy principle for an equity perspective, right? In all of our interactions with the public, this equity perspective principle calls upon staff to incorporate an equity perspective into their work activities, right? That means that we're asking people to think about how, or acknowledge that work and seek to accommodate different contexts, experiences, and abilities. The equity perspective is informed by a number of documents: COG's Title VI Plan and Program, the TPB Equity Statement or Resolution that y'all passed in July, and the TPB's equity emphasis areas. Applying an equity perspective acknowledges past inequities and barriers to involvement and seeks to be more just. And then one of the steps in the participation workflow asks staff to think about how they will apply an equity perspective to their work. In that question, we provide the following considerations for thinking about how to apply an equity perspective to their work. Next slide, please. Almost a year ago, when staff started this process for updating the plan, we followed a simple approach. We started by gathering information. We looked at peer MPO plans. We referenced the COG Title VI Plan and Program. We even reviewed an evaluation of TPB participation activities that we hired a consultant to write back in 2018. Working internally and with the stakeholders, right? This is the Citizens Advisory Committee, the Access for All Advisory Committee, and the Technical Committee. Staff identified the strengths of the existing plans and areas where we wanted to do better. Over the last since we started this process, I presented regularly to these stakeholders as we iterated through plan changes. The CAC, AFA, and Technical Committee had a direct hand in shaping the draft that we released for public comment. We couldn't have done this without them. Next slide, please. The TPB participation plan started its federally required 45-day public comment period on Tuesday, August 25th. The comment period ends Friday, October 9th. I'm excited for a 45-day public comment period, 15 days longer than our typical comment period, because I really hope that it allows extra time for the public to review the plan and submit feedback, right? This feedback will shape, this plan will shape TPB interactions with the public for the foreseeable future. And the more input that we get from the public, from our partners, the stronger the plan will be. This is my call to action to you. I encourage you or your staffs to read the draft plan and submit comment. You can either use the online comment form at mwcog.org/TPB comments, or you can email me your comments directly. The feedback that we collect from the public, our federal and jurisdiction partners, and anyone else who comments will be summarized in a memo that we will share with the board on October 15th. That memo will also include staff response to comment and a list of changes that will be reflected in the final participation plan. At the October 21st meeting, we are going to ask the board to approve the plan. Following that approval, I will work with my colleagues to implement the plan internally so that staff are prepared to use it and guide their work in the years ahead. Next slide. And finally, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of the folks that helped make this draft plan possible. The people that worked really closely on it include John Swanson, Karen Armendariz, Abigail Zenner. Lynn and Conti were also really instrumental. And again, I wanted to call out the Citizens Advisory Committee, the Access for All Advisory Committee, and the technical committees for listening to me kind of share ideas with them again and again and again, and providing really constructive feedback. TPB, I thank you for your time, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Brian, thank you so much. Sounds like a really fantastic process that you've been going through. So I'll ask if there are any questions for Brian. We'll start with the district. From Maryland?
Yes, hi, how are you? Hi, this is Councilmember Denny Taveras from Prince George's County. And I appreciate all the work that has gone into this particular effort. So the question that I have in terms of ensuring equity and inclusion is any of the products going to be translated? I mean, do we have any, sorry, my dog. Hold on, let me see if I could bribe him. I have Lucky, here you go, honey. So are we looking, oh Lord, Lucky, can we ask about what products would be translated? How are we ensuring that it is available in the most needed languages in the region, and ensuring that those voices are also included in the process of what we're doing? And, so just talking about the language access piece.
Right, so the language access is governed by the COG Title VI Plan and Program, which is kind of a separate, actually the participation plan that we've developed is part of those Title VI Plan and Program, right? So the Title VI Plan and Program are the overarching documents at COG and at the TPB that guide that. And I believe that we're in the process of rethinking or updating that language accessibility component. We recognize that, one of the principles is plain language. We recognize that making sure that our materials are accessible to people is really important. And I do believe that we have guidance from that Title VI Plan and Program. The participation plan is not a document that has been translated, but it is something that if there was demand for, we would find a way to make that happen.
Ms. Taveras, this is Kanti. Thank you for the question. I want to be clear that we do periodically conduct an analysis of the minority languages spoken in the region. And we typically make available most of our products in Spanish. Additional language translations are also available consistent with the Title VI accommodations policy at COG. And we are going to continue to make that available, not just this one planned document, but with the meetings, with the general comments and the surveys that we do plan to reach out to all of those groups as well.
Thank you, Kanti.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Any other questions from Maryland? Virginia? WMATA or other agencies? Great. Brian, sounds like you've got your work cut out, and we're looking forward to seeing all the comments wrapped up and the work that you do. So thank you so much, and thank you for acknowledging that it is this big team putting this work together.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Okay, we're on to item number 9, performance-based planning and programming, transit safety draft targets. The next item is regarding adoption of safety targets for the transit systems in the region. We will not be adopting the targets today, but we'll do so at a later date. I believe this is good follow-up to our work on the roadway safety. Eric will provide us with the background today, and then following on the roadway safety, this will be the first time that the region will adopt transit safety targets. So Eric, the show is yours.
Right, thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me.
We can. I can.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair Russell and members of the board. My presentation today is on a federally required MPO action, which is the setting of performance-based planning and programming targets for transit safety. Next slide, please. Today, I'm going to cover the requirements, the process, and a set of preliminary targets for this performance area of transit safety. As the chair mentioned at a later meeting, we'll be bringing back a set of final targets to you, the board, for approval. In addition to this presentation, there is an accompanying memo in the mail out for this agenda item with more information as well. Next slide, please. So just to recap what performance-based planning and programming, or PBPP, is all about, it's a required process under federal transportation regulations for state DOTs, for MPOs, and for providers of public transportation or transit agencies to work together and move towards a data-driven transportation decision-making process. In a sense, quantifying the bang for the buck when federal funds as well as state and local funds are directed towards transportation projects. And PBPP should always be considered in the projects and programs that are funded in the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, and in the Long Range Plan. Next slide, please. So as the chair mentioned, transit safety is one of 5 areas of PBPP measures and targets. The TPB has set annual targets 3 times now for highway safety, and we'll be bringing those back again at the end of the year with Mr. Sherman. In addition, we set targets back in 2018 for highway assets for highway system performance, and we'll be taking those up again in 2022 since they're set on a 4-year basis. But this is the first time that we're working with the transit safety area. This was the last of the PBPP rulemakings to be finalized. It only was finalized in July of 2018, and only this past July did the requirements become effective. Next slide, please. So again, it's only just becoming effective, the transit safety requirement. As with other PBP areas, this is the first time we're doing this particular setting of targets. And so we have to establish new relationships and collect and report new data. So TPB staff has been working with the applicable transit operators to collect all the data and put this together that you're going to see today. In addition, we've had the pandemic, and so even though the rule was supposed to require targets be set by July 2020, the Federal Transit Administration put out a notice saying, because of the pandemic, they're going to suspend enforcement through the rest of the year. But we had most of the information already through our work the past couple of years with the transit agencies. So we thought that it was very timely to bring it to you now. And this is going to be an annual requirement. So transit agencies are already thinking about 2021. So we want to get the 2020 targets in front of you first. Next slide, please. So for transit safety, there are 4 basic performance measures: fatalities, serious injuries, safety events, and they're listed there: collisions, derailments, fires, or evacuations, and then a system reliability measure. This is very similar to the highway safety measures that the board has adopted in the past. Fatalities and serious injuries are also on the highway safety side. And then for transit, we've added the safety events and the system reliability performance measures. Generally, these measures actually have 2 components. There's a number of events, so number of serious injuries, if you will, as well as a rate, where it's the number of injuries per revenue vehicle mile. That's the miles traveled when the vehicle is open door to customers serving passengers. And so there's both the number and the rate. The rate allows comparison between systems of different sizes, from the largest to the smallest transit agency. And it's also important to note that all these measures are reported by mode. So for heavy rail, like Metro Rail, streetcar for DC streetcar, and then urban bus for the multiple bus operators we have in this region. Next slide, please. So now a word about the applicability of this transit safety rulemaking. The Federal Transit Administration, the FTA, wrote this rule so that it only applies to select transit agencies. You have to be an agency that receives federal Section 5307 funding in this region, which is the urban funding for transit systems. and also be subject to FTA safety regulation. So here are the operators and the modes that for whom this ruling is applicable. So for Metro Rail, the heavy rail system, the Metro bus system, the Metro bus paratransit system, DDOT, DC circulator and the DC streetcar, the MTA commuter bus, PRTC down in Prince William County coming up with their bus systems and their paratransit service, and then the local bus systems in suburban Maryland who get 5307 funding as subrecipients through the Maryland Transit Administration. However, you'll note the Northern Virginia bus agencies, Fairfax Connector, ART, DASH, are not on this list. The rule does not apply to them because they don't get the federal money. Similarly, the commuter rail systems, MARC and VRE are not on this list because they're regulated by the Federal Railroad Administration, not the FRA. So in a sense, we're looking at a select group of the transit agencies for this rulemaking. Next slide, please. So here's the end result. This is the table for the regional transit safety targets. Again, this is a preliminary, a draft set of targets. We'll be looking at them in the future. Down the left, you can see the 5 nodes, the heavy rail, which is a bit technical, but it's basically Metro Rail, streetcar for DC streetcar. Hopefully someday we'll have light rail to add to this list as well. And then the urban bus systems, again, Metro Bus, Ride On, Prince George's County the Bus, Van Gogh, Frederick Transit are all included in this list. The commuter bus operators, so the MTA commuter bus and PRTC's commuter bus are another mode. And then the demand response or paratransit, which includes Metro Access as well as some of the other demand response and paratransit systems operated locally by jurisdictions. And then the 4 safety measures across the top: fatalities, serious injuries, safety events, and the reliability or the mean distance between failures. How many miles does a vehicle travel typically before it experiences a significant failure? So these are all defined in the transit rulemaking. And in fact, this data has been collected for many years by the FTA's National Transit Database. So there's a trend line data stretching back years and years. But this is the first time agencies have to set targets. So on a positive note, I would guess, none of the operators in this region anticipate any fatalities in the coming year. So everybody expects number 0 fatalities, which leads to a rate, obviously, of 0 fatalities. However, we do expect several hundred serious injuries to take place, both on Metro Rail and urban bus over the course of the year. Of course, compared to 500,000 trips being taken on these systems every day on a daily basis, eventually accidents do happen. And then safety events, again, this is looking more at the internal workings or what happens with the transit agencies, if you will, but collisions, derailments, other incidents that do happen, and then how many miles the buses travel between distance. Again, just to reiterate, these are preliminary or draft figures. This rulemaking, everybody was working on it just as the pandemic hit. Many of the Maryland local systems approved their targets with dates like March 7th, March 9th. Others who didn't quite get it across the finishing line, if you will, are still working to formally adopt some of these systems, including specifically DC streetcar. They haven't nailed down their numbers yet. In some respects, the system is so small, it's very hard to come up with a definitive trend line for the system. But we expect everybody to be finalizing these targets over the next month, and then we'll bring them back to you for approval. So the figures will change. I know they will change, but they shouldn't change by much. So next slide, please. So it's a very dense table. Don't necessarily expect everybody to have any comments now, but of course, I'll be open to questions in a minute. And again, we'll be working on these over the next month. Staff are coordinating with the transit agencies that are still working to formally adopt these targets. I do want to note at this point and express my thanks to all the transit colleagues across many of the local agencies who have participated in this process with TPB staff as we work to do this for the first time. And again, we anticipate bringing this back to the board in November, presuming that every agency gets this signed off on at their respective board or executive authority. I will note that there's been some initial feedback that's included a request to see the actual performance data from past years for all transit systems in the region, including the Northern Virginia bus systems. This data is collected by the Federal Transit Administration. So we'll be taking this on at TPB over the next month to put all this data together, and we can include it in the report that you'll hopefully also see in November as additional information. But again, this regulation or requirement only applies to the applicable transit agencies. In future, as with the other performance areas like highway safety, we will be able to compare actual performance versus the adopted targets in 2021 and subsequent years. And this information, the comparison of actual performance versus the forecast targets, will hopefully improve the transportation decision-making process, the whole purpose of PBPP. So next slide, please. Thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to take any questions.
Thank you, Eric. We'll start with questions from the district. How about Maryland?
Yes, this is Casey Kosik from Tacoma Park. I have two questions. Thank you very much for this presentation and really important information. One of the questions I have is, who is included in these targets? Is it only people who are actively riders on the bus or rail? Does it count, for example, someone who immediately exits a bus, for example, and is hit by a car or otherwise injured or killed? Is it just people who are actively on the vehicle at that moment?
Right, that question can get pretty complex because while there are specific federal data definitions, some agencies do collect data in different ways. Not everybody always follows the definition precisely, but it should be employees, it should be contractors or consultants, it should be persons on board vehicles, or it should be people who are external to the vehicle but are impacted by it. So for instance, if a bus hit a car with people in it and the people were injured. But again, it's only reported if the correct data is collected and reported to the National Transit Database. I think everybody, as part of this process, not only is there the performance measures that I'm talking to you about today, but the transit agencies also have to create and implement a transit agency safety plan. That's actually the biggest part of this rulemaking. And so that transportation safety plan that they're implementing would lead to improved definitions and, if you will, categorization of all these people. But again, it should be any people that's either on board a vehicle or interact with a vehicle should be included in this data.
Thank you. And I think for the purposes of being able to see it from a regional perspective, it would be useful as much as possible for that to be standardized across those agencies so we can have a sense of how they are each reporting and not having discrepancies between those different numbers. My other question is, just looking at this data here, it strikes me the significant difference between the targets for fatalities and serious injuries for transit versus our targets that we've looked at for personal vehicles and vehicles overall, with the fatalities in the hundreds and the serious injuries in the thousands for those. So I think that's meaningful in terms of providing a different view of how safety can be improved through transit and through mass transit. And I also am curious because I see that the chart looks like it is using vehicle revenue miles as the rate. I was wondering if there's any consideration in terms of actual number of people involved, or if this is based on vehicle miles traveled, or what exactly vehicle revenue miles means.
There were different proposals to track this data. FTA settled on this denominator, if you will, vehicle revenue miles, in response to many comments that looking at utilization by passengers of transit services or other numbers were too complex and didn't account for unique experiences or unique circumstances for each transit agency. Certainly more analysis could be done, and I think some of the leading transit agencies do that sort of analysis. But otherwise, the greater point you're making is that riding public transportation is generally safer than driving in your automobile, and that's the important takeaway. But again, as with other performance areas, we hope to do future work as this gets implemented by state DOTs, by MPOs, and by providers of public transportation. Much as we're doing on the highway safety side with the in-depth detailed study, we hope to bring back to you future information, work in future years on how the transit systems in the region are improving their safety.
Thank you. Great questions. Are there any other questions from Maryland?
Do you have time Friday?
I'm sorry, who's this? Okay. We'll move on to questions from Virginia and WMATA or other agencies. And just to make sure I didn't miss somebody, I thought we had somebody that wanted to ask a question pop in. Is that just a unmute? Okay, it sounds like those are all of the questions, Eric. Thank you very much. We'll look forward to the finished product.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, on to item number 10, TPB's Long Range Transportation Plan, Visualize 2045, Implementation and 2022 Plan Update. I know it feels like just yesterday that we adopted our Long Range Transportation Plan, Visualize 2045. We held the Long Range Plan Task Force meetings, we adopted the aspirational initiatives. All of that was a bit more than 3 years ago. Now we start our work to update this plan, which we must complete in 2022. Stacy Cook is going to brief us on how we plan to go about this update. So Stacy, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chair Russell and members of the board. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. So as the chair noted, my name is Stacy Cook and I lead development of TPB's quadrennial long range plan, Visualize 2045. Next slide, please. So today I'll speak to you primarily about two topics. One is an implementation activity that we conducted over the last year, which is site visits to our members throughout the region. I'll speak to you of some planning activities to inform the long range plan, and I'll present to you a timeline to update the quadrennial plan. Next slide, please. So I'd like to note that in the mail out package, you have received a memorandum, which is a briefing that provides more information about critical steps and dates for the 22 update, if you wish for more detailed information. So over the last year, you might have remembered that you signed letters requesting these meetings, but we conducted more than 30 meetings with members of our, with TPB members throughout the region. And we discussed the aspirational initiatives and other policy priorities. TPB's responsibility as the regional transportation planning organization means we conduct in a continuing, comprehensive, and coordinated fashion our planning process. And in part, this means working together toward our common goals. And as Chair Russell noted, with Visualize 2045, you endorsed aspirational initiatives, which are projects, programs, and policy concepts that we think, if we implement more of these, if we fund and enact them, we can see improved transportation system performance. And so with the endorsement of these initiatives, you asked us and our members to seriously explore the concepts of the aspirational initiatives and to move forward to realize these aspirational initiatives. And so these site visits were one response to that board request. Next slide, please. So on the screen before you are some of the primary topics we discussed during our meetings. But if there's one takeaway that I'd really like you to hear today, it's that across all of these topics, despite the regional differences and geographies and demographics, there is coordinated planning happening between TPB and its members to implement projects, programs, and policies that help us reach those goals that we've set out in our policy framework. And so next, I'll speak to these topics and important member activities that they're undertaking, as well as corresponding TPB activities. Next slide, please. So when we went to these meetings, we talked about projects, programs, and policies that our members are advancing. And we also shared information about data, studies and findings from work that we've conducted at TPB. We shared about our programs and our technical assistance to ensure that we are doing our part to support implementation. And also, based on what we heard from the site visits, our staff are responding through its work program in the UPWP. Next slide, please. Getting into the meat of the meetings, I won't be able to go into every detail today, but I do want to share some of these important activities. And speaking to bringing jobs and housing closer together, our members are improving internal circulation. They're focusing and implementing transit-oriented development near commuter rail and metro stations, which is consistent with those targets we've set out with our partner COG for the housing initiative. Our members are rethinking parking. For example, the city of Laurel, thinking about what is the right amount of parking, not only from a transportation planning perspective, because we understand it affects demand, but also because it affects the affordability of housing. Our members are implementing sub-area plans and working towards new ones. And these are a key tool to implement our activity centers and to provide better transit access by foot, walking, and other types of access to transit. The North Woodbridge plan in Prince William County is a great example of this around a planned VRE station. And when we sat down during these meetings, they were attended by both planning and transportation planning directors. And what we found is they were working head on to address the key challenge of getting the timing right for transportation and land use challenges. And we heard from our DOTs in Virginia, DC, and Maryland that they're working to ensure that state roads that pass through these localities are suited to the context, for example, with Maryland's new context-sensitive guide for state highways. On the TPB side, corresponding TPB activities include our Transit-Oriented Communities web map, which is a tool we're producing that will be for use by our members and others in the region. We heard that many of our members have benefited from our Transportation and Land Use Connections program. And as discussed, we're advancing the housing initiative with our partner COG. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, going back just one. I wanted to mention that I included the Metro Rail initiative in the Bringing Jobs and Housing Closer Together slide, because our members across the region did note that they're very supportive of improving the core of Metro, implementing and funding those projects that will help the whole system work better, which is the foundation of this initiative. And that's extremely important because we do bring jobs and housing closer together, making transit a more viable option for more people. Those improvements will be incredibly important. Next slide, please. Speaking to the initiative, Improve Bike Walk Access to Transit and the National Capital Trail Network. Across the region, we've found that our members are undertaking a number of projects and policies to prioritize placemaking and safety when it comes to bike walk access and transit. That includes policies such as we've seen in the district with reducing speeds and reducing options for turning right on red. It includes conducting gap analysis and ensuring connectivity for bicyclists and pedestrians. And we've heard that being undertaken in the city of Manassas and Loudoun County, where they're working to identify and prioritize those projects that will complete networks. And across the region, in Prince George's County, Montgomery County, we're hearing about a lot of projects to implement the National Capital Trail Network. At TPB, We're managing the Transportation Alternatives Program that support many of these projects. And we encourage technical assistance requests for studies that can help to implement the transit access focus areas and the National Capital Trail Network that you approved in July. We're really excited about these projects, and in particular, applications for those areas that approach jurisdictional boundaries or cross them that are the hardest to implement and plan for, are applications we'd be excited to see. We anticipate there's opportunities to conduct workshops and webinars about these best practices for these topics, and we'll look for opportunities to do so going forward. Next slide, please. Across the region, from the city of Frederick to Prince George's County to Charles County and Prince William, we have heard so much about studying and implementing BRT services. From the new Flash BRT that Montgomery County is implementing, to the Route 1 project in Fairfax County. We're also seeing Prince William looking into feasibility studies for several of its corridors for BRT. We've heard about Prince George's County and an interest in being able to move more people quickly with BRT type services, whether that's bus on shoulder or other options, connecting people to jobs. And across the region, people are researching and implementing quick and cost-effective ways to move bus services faster and to make the case for these services. At TPB, again, we encourage technical assistance over the next few years, requests that would promote implementation of BRT and transitways, or studies to improve corridors, in particular those that cross jurisdictions. And we'll look for opportunities to conduct workshops, webinars, or peer exchanges about best practices for these topics. Next slide, please. As we continue to hear about bus rapid transit, one of those things we heard from the city of Frederick and Frederick County is how if buses, those commuter buses that move south from the city and county, could move at 45 miles an hour, as they could on the express highway network, as those networks are expected to move at 45 miles an hour, instead of 12 or 15 miles an hour stuck in traffic, that could be a game changer, and there could be regional benefits. And our members are certainly planning and implementing express highways. We've seen Transform 66 moving forward and studies advancing regarding the TRP project in Maryland. At TPB, we promote this aspirational initiative with the explicit understanding that we endorse commuter and express buses on the express lanes, and we encourage carpool and vanpool riding free. We know that there's been a lot of questions come up from COVID, and do wanted to mention that we are exploring what the potential is going forward in a post-pandemic world as to what the impacts COVID might have on driving, on transit, on telework, on biking and walking. And so as questions come up as we advance projects, we're looking to provide data for that, and I'll speak more about that in just a minute. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, our public opinion research, it will also include numerous questions regarding telework and people's expectations going forward for their travel behaviors. Want to mention that our discussions were largely completed with our members pre-COVID. So when we did have discussions, we understood that a lot of our members are implementing and studying various travel demand management approaches. They're implementing telework, and some are having challenges with employers and some more success. Some places such as Charles County are really advancing their broadband opportunities for their residents in order to make telework a more viable option. But across the line, we think that this COVID-19 experience has certainly been an opportunity for us to all learn. And at TPB, we made telework templates available. The timing worked out well, but those, along with other communication materials regarding telework, came available early March. So hopefully there was opportunities there to leverage those materials to support our members during these challenging times. Next slide, please. What else did we hear? So going beyond our aspirational initiatives, we have a lot of other priorities and a lot of other topics that impact transportation planning. We certainly heard about safety. Our members are taking many steps to implement complete streets. They're endorsing and taking steps to implement Vision Zero policies. And at TPB, of course, you are very familiar with our safety study and the recommendations And we're thrilled with the endorsement of our safety program that you advanced just this July. Our members are either interested in or participating in pilots for connected and automated vehicles, CAV. They are, they spoke to an interest in the regional value of working with the MPO to talk about data management and how we would share or communicate our data, opportunities for shared procurement, and to ensure, especially with that C, that connectivity part in implementing CAV, that interjurisdictional coordination will be really critical to ensure that vehicles can seamlessly travel from one state to another and one jurisdiction to another. And at TPB, we have recently completed a white paper that we will release later this year. And we're undertaking a webinar series on connected and automated vehicles. And we're looking at the opportunity to provide information and education through that webinar series, to provide a peer exchange through the webinar series, and also talk about that intersect of connected and automated vehicles and our priorities at the MPO and as a region. We heard about resiliency, one of our key priorities and a priority of Chair Russell. With climate change, we'll see more extreme weather and stormwater issues, and these are of great concern to our members. And so at TPB, we're already undertaking numerous activities, including supporting or recognizing the Transportation Climate Initiative. We're bringing to you a workshop next month on climate resiliency. And starting this fall, I'll be leading a study to collect information about resiliency going forward in our region. So what are those activities that our members in our region are undertaking to examine the vulnerability of our transportation assets and systems to extreme weather, and what are those regional strategies we should be undertaking to ensure a resilient and reliable system going forward. So I look forward to sharing more about that in the near future. Will be one of the things we heard is communications regarding the relationship between local action and regional priorities would be beneficial, and in particular materials that could be shared on social media. And so we're responding directly to that interest from our members. We're working on infographics and short videos that we're developing that we'll make available to our members to share via Twitter or Facebook or whatever social media strategies they prefer to use. And lastly, we heard a lot about data, the need for data, good data about public opinion to inform our transportation plans, projects, programs, and policies. And so we're responding with a public opinion survey, and I'll tell you more about that on the next slide. Next slide, please. So starting this week, members in our region will be receiving a survey which we call our Voices of the Region survey. This will be a closed survey in order to ensure it can be statistically significant for member counties, DC, and the city of Alexandria. The topics that we're covering in the survey largely revolve around 3 topics: COVID-19 impacts on transportation preferences, projects that support the TPB policy framework. We're looking at what types of enhancements are most interesting and most attractive to our people living in our jurisdictions. And then also, we're going to take a look at planning factors and emerging issues, such as resiliency, connected and automated vehicles, and issues related to equity in transportation that we know is so important to work toward together. Later this winter, we're going to conduct parallel focus groups. This will be small group outreach that reflects on those same 3 topics that are listed on the screen. And so we consider this phase 1 of our long-range plan, while at the same time we acknowledge that this information will certainly inform more than just our long-range plan. We find the data likely to be applicable to a lot of our planning that's more short-term as well. One last slide, if you would advance the slides. So I'd like to share with you our timeline for development of the long-range plan. All of the activities that I just spoke of are very important in informing our next long-range plan. The work that we've done to advance aspirational initiatives, we look to see those in our projects, programs, and policies that we receive when we release the call for projects this December. The timeline shows two main tracks: the technical and policy work track, shown in blue and gray, and the public participation track, shown in green. In reality, with the release of our survey, we're beginning to plan at this time, but we look forward to a more formal kickoff later this winter. The blue track, again, is where we'll conduct our financial constraint, systems performance analysis, air quality conformity analysis, and we'll be examining other planning factors and emerging issues impacting transportation. And then we'll move on to developing the actual planned products. For the public participation track, there are two public outreach phases. The first I just spoke of with our survey and our small focus groups. The second phase, we're going to need to be nimble, depending on where we are in the pandemic and social distancing. But we are going to be planning ways to have a regional discussion in an open fashion about issues impacting transportation. We also plan for two public comment periods, one on the long-range plan and air quality conformity inputs. That will be in largely April 2021. And then on the draft plan itself in April of 2022. And what I wanted to let you know, make you aware of, is that we're doing something different in this go-round. We're planning on collecting our comments from the public, summarizing those, and bringing them to you, the board, to provide opportunity to guide us in how we respond to those comments so that you have a voice in that process. We look forward to hearing your feedback on that when it's time. When the plan has been reviewed and is final, we look to bring that to you in June of 2022. And while that may seem like a long ways away, it's a mere 20 months or so. And so we've got a lot of work to do between now and then. With this, I do conclude my presentation. I thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions or comments.
I'm going to lead off with a question and ask if you could go into a little more detail about how the jurisdictions that will be participating in the closed survey were selected.
Yes, so all of our jurisdictions will be participating in the closed survey. We are sending out letters. The letters are being selected at random, but every single one of our members will have jurisdictions participating in the survey. We'll have citizens participating in the survey. And so the survey methodology will ensure that every single one of our jurisdictions will have representation. But we've also decided to create the sample to be large enough to ensure not only statistical significance at the regional level as we normally do, but also at the county level and for the city of DC and Alexandria. The data collection effort to be statistically significant for all of our members would have been beyond our ability to, would have been a very costly effort. So it will certainly include everyone, but be statistically significant at those 10 areas. Does that sufficiently answer your question, or do you have a follow-up?
No, it does answer my question. Thank you very much. Sure. So I will move on to see if we have any other questions for Stacy, and we'll start with the district. Okay, anybody from Maryland? Virginia?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Hi, this is Kanik from Alexandria. So my question is building off of the theme that Councilwoman Tavares brought up in terms of equity and language. When we're doing this public opinion research and the small groups and some of the focus groups, how exactly are we going to be doing the appropriate outreach so that other languages are included?
That's a great question. Our survey itself is being conducted in English and Spanish. The public opinion research we're formulating at this time, and we look to be gathering, our current plan, while in development, is to have about 10 paid focus groups. And several of those will include, we anticipate, people from our equity emphasis areas in order to ensure that we have broad perspective, as well as some that may have specific age groups. But we haven't yet determined whether or not there will be any specific focus on language. But I really appreciate the question, and we'll certainly take it into heart as we finalize development of our focus group efforts.
Thank you. And just one last comment,
Yes.
just because of, I believe it was one of the points on the slide towards the bottom, and it was mentioning the impact on riders from COVID-19. And as I'm sure all of you are aware, my colleagues are aware as well, some of the hardest hit communities are communities of color, especially the Latino community. And so they are very much reliant upon public transportation. And I feel many times their voices are not amplified enough so that they are being heard in how public transportation is affecting their lives, especially during COVID-19. So if there's a little bit more effort put into some of that for some of the focus groups, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and agree with your comment that that's certainly one of the things we've heard a lot about, and it requires additional consideration of how we treat that. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Dave
Others from Virginia?
Hi,
Mr. Snyder?
Hi, how are you? Thanks so much. And Stacy, thanks for the briefing. This may be a question more for Conti. One of the dynamics that we face is that projects are originated at the local and state level, and they get to the TPB, and by that time, whatever metrics or guidance the TPB would have provided in the original stage comes too late. So my question is, how is the origination of projects and the kinds of goals and things that you're talking about at the TPB level going to come together so that the projects that states and localities originate are actually going to be supportive of the larger sort of metrics and goals of the TPB?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Snyder, for the question. I really appreciate where it's coming from, in the sense that you were part of the transportation planning and programming process in the region. And this is exactly why almost 14 months ago, we came to you requesting your help in writing those letters to the transportation directors and to the planning department directors within each jurisdiction, so that we could not, rather than waiting another 3.5 years for all of those projects to have been selected and funding decisions being made and finally coming to TPB, we said we are going to take the initiative. We are going to be proactive. So as soon as the aspirational initiatives were adopted, we asked you to write those letters. Those letters were very helpful. Stacy said we had about 30 meetings. Most of them was attended by very senior staffs within the transportation department and land use planning department. So we met with them and explained to them, these are the TPB's priorities. These types of projects is what the TPB is expecting for the next round of its long range plan. So rather than waiting for them not to be aware of it, we have reached out to them and said, please be aware of it. Number one, as you consider projects, tell us how we can help. If you are considering, if you are hosting meetings, if you're hosting work sessions where you are evaluating projects, if you want us to be there to explain our analysis, our data, the TPB's policy priorities, we will be happy to do that. If you want to include any of these priorities as part of your quantitative or qualitative scoring system, nowadays many agencies have a scoring system. We are happy to assist in that. So that's what we have done. And this series of public opinion surveys is going to be conducted in coordination with the local transportation agencies, and we plan to provide this information to them. So this is how we are trying to tread that needle, where TPB does not have any authority in deciding transportation investments, or really a seat at the table in where those decisions are being made. whether it is through the statewide program or through a sub-regional program. But rather than simply waiting till the end, we are trying to work cooperatively with them in trying to make sure that they are aware of these discussions, these priorities that the TPB is setting for the region. We are always happy to encourage any other advice you might all have for us. How can we better assist our member jurisdictions? The TPB has always relied on let us think regionally, but act locally. So that is the framework within which we are trying to assist, bring better projects and programs into the plan, Mr. Snyder.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Any other questions from Virginia folks? How about WMATA or other agencies? Great. Thank you, Stacy. We're really looking forward to this. It does seem like time flies.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So this is going to be a great project. We're on now to our final item. This is the Regional Employer Telework Survey results. As Conti noted during his report, I was pleased to report on the work the TPB and Commuter Connections has been doing on travel demand management and teleworking over the past 25 years. There's understandably a lot of interest about teleworking as a strategy to help reduce congestion and thereby improve roadway safety. Even before the pandemic, our region had a healthy degree of telecommuting, yet there was potential for more and progress was slow. Now it appears there is a greater degree of willingness on the part of workers and employers to utilize teleworking. You'll recall that teleworking travel demand management is one of the aspirational initiatives of Visualize 2045, and Nick Rentos will report to us now on the first of 4 surveys that we'll be conducting over the next year and a half to better understand the prospects and plans for teleworking. So Nick, we'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and good afternoon to the board. I'm going to be presenting some information from a recent survey that we conducted of employers in the region on telework. And we can move to the next slide. This survey is conducted every 3 years by Commuter Connections, and the primary purpose is to define the portion of teleworking influenced by assistance provided to the employers in through our employer outreach program. During fiscal year 2020, the survey was expanded to include some additional questions on the coronavirus's influence on telework at employment sites. Next slide. We examined telework changes made by employers during the pandemic. We also interviewed employers that were in either the employer outreach database or designated federal employee transportation coordinators or telework coordinators at federal agencies. The survey was sent through email. We also sent it out through postal mail, and it was an internet-based survey, and we followed up by telephone. Next slide. The questionnaire had some broad topics associated with it. We looked at changes in worksite operation due to the pandemic. We also looked at the number of employees that were teleworking at the time of the survey and prior to the pandemic, as well as changes in telework programs or policies in response to the pandemic. And we also looked at the likelihood to continue telework after the pandemic is over. And we also asked questions about assistance received with telework planning or implementation and significant telework issues that were encountered during the pandemic, as well as any benefits that were realized by employers and or managers through telework. And then we also had some characteristics of the employer types, whether it was size, location, or what type of industry they were associated with. Next slide. We surveyed a little over 4,500 employers in May and June, and we had a 4% response rate. I will say that this was probably one of the most challenging surveys that we've ever had to conduct, and I've been doing surveys for over 2 decades. And a lot of that had to do with office closures, employee furloughs, and other impediments to reaching employer representatives to respond to the survey. So we didn't calculate a confidence level for the survey, but what I will tell you is we can look at this as a very large focus group. There is a companion briefing report that's available with in-depth survey response details that was in your agenda packet today. So if you want to really dive into the details, a lot of that information is outlined in that report. Next slide. The 180 survey respondents were pretty well distributed throughout the region and really represented a wide range of employer sizes and types. 45% reported Virginia as their primary work site. About the same amount had the primary work site in Maryland, and 12% indicated the District of Columbia as their primary work location. The survey asked respondents how many employees their organization employed at all work sites in the region, and those surveyed ranged from a total size of 1 employee to more than 20,000, with an average of about 488 employees region-wide. And that slightly more than half had 100 or fewer employees in the region, and nearly 1/4 had 25 or fewer employees. About 20% employed between 101 and 250 employees, and 14% employed between 250 and 999 employees, and the remaining 14% employed 1,000 or more regional workers. So just under half of the respondents worked for a private sector company, and 34% worked for a nonprofit or association, and then federal government agencies and state and local government agencies accounted for 13% and 5% respectively of the respondents. The survey sample included a pretty good cross-section of employers from about 25 different industry types. Next slide. So what we found was that 96% of the work sites either shut down or reduced on-site operations either completely or partially since the pandemic began. And at the time of the survey, 95% of sites with reduced operation were still closed or limited or had limited on-site operation. Next slide. And then 97% of the worksite had at least some telework since the pandemic began, which is almost all of the work sites. And for 55%, it was full-time for all employees. Next slide. Telework was a widely applied strategy to maintain business operations during the pandemic. Nearly all, it was, I said almost 97%, said at least some employees were teleworking, and more than half, as I said earlier, had all employees teleworked all of their work days, and 11% said all employees teleworked some, but not all of the work days. So 3 in 10 noted that some employees teleworked, but others worked at their usual work locations. Respondents were asked to estimate the actual number of employees who were teleworking at the time of the survey and at the time before the pandemic began. 4 in 10 said that all of their employees were teleworking during the pandemic, and another 21% said between 76 and 99% of employees were teleworking. And about a quarter reported an employee telework percentage lower than 76%. So a large share of the employers surveyed said telework was in place for at least some workers prior to the pandemic. Only 24% reported no teleworking at their work sites, but the percentage of pre-pandemic telework was much lower than during the pandemic. About a third said some employees teleworked, but that it was half or less of the total employees. Only 8% of respondents reported that more than 3/4 of employees teleworked before the pandemic. So on average, 82% of the Washington region workers of the surveyed employers were teleworking at the time of the survey. The average pre-pandemic percentage of telework was 36%, and so it went up to 82%, which is a 46% percentage point increase. Next slide. More than 6 in 10 respondents said their organization had a formal telework program or policy in place before the pandemic began. And this is really not a surprise because we are very well prepared in this region for telework. Going back even into the early 2000s, there are a lot of, most major employers in this region will have some type of a policy or program in place. Another 14% say they didn't have a formal program or policy in place but they had one in place at the time of the survey, and it was probably developed during the pandemic. And about a quarter of the survey respondents didn't have a policy at all. Next slide. About a third of the respondents allowed more employees to telework. They expanded the eligibility for teleworking to job functions and/or employee groups, such as new employees who were previously not eligible, and 9% expanded the number of days or hours that employees were permitted to telework. 20% indicated making some other type of policy or program change, such as permitting teleworking without a formal agreement, ensuring full technology access to make working from home more feasible, becoming more flexible in telework arrangements to accommodate individual situations, and developing more remote meeting options. Next slide. 92% of respondents said their organizations anticipated continuing telework after the stay-at-home restrictions were lifted and employees could return to their usual work locations. 20% said they would most likely continue telework at the level during the pandemic. 37% said they would continue telework at a higher level than the pre-pandemic level, allowing more employees to telework than before the pandemic, and/or allowing more days or hours of telework per week. 12% anticipated falling back to the pre-pandemic telework level, and 23% expected to reduce telework to a level lower than before the pandemic, with fewer teleworkers and/or reduced telework days or hours. Just about all of the respondents reported a pandemic telework level that was higher than the pre-pandemic level, and this means that more than half of the organizations will have a higher telework level after the pandemic ends. And employer size really didn't seem to be a factor in future telework. 57% of employers with more than 100 employees and 58% of employers with 100 or fewer employees anticipated a higher than pre-pandemic level of telework. Next slide. The survey also asked respondents if their organizations had considered or discussed implementing other actions to reduce the spread of future virus outbreaks after employees are permitted to return to the usual workplace. 7 in 10 respondents said their organizations had considered at least one action. The overwhelming share, which is about 64%, considered flexible or staggered work hours to minimize employee contact when arriving and leaving work. 3 in 10 considered compressed work schedules, with employees working fewer days per week with more hours per day. And 3% mentioned increasing telework, and about 1% considered starting an employee shuttle, bus pool, or van pool that would be specific just to their work site. Next slide. Respondents were also asked about other actions or initiatives that they've considered to reduce the spread of the virus. About a third of respondents said their organizations had considered or discussed other initiatives to reduce future spread of the virus at their workplace. And most of that involved implementing strategies reflective of the practices recommended for all public spaces. Nearly 20% considered actions to create social distancing at the work sites, and 10% considered requiring and or providing masks and other personal protective equipment for employees. 9% of the respondents also considered actions to enhance the cleanliness of the workplace, such as offering hand sanitizer, hand washing stations, and more frequent sanitization of the workplace. And 8% plan more telework and more virtual meetings to minimize employee contact. 6% said they considered limiting the number of workers in the workplace through staggered work shifts. Next slide. We also presented a list of work or employee issues or problems that respondents may have encountered with increased telework, and asked them to rate how significant these issues had been to their organizations during the pandemic. And the issues are divided into 3 groups. The top group represents issues related to technology and workspace at home. The middle group represents productivity management and coordination issues. And the bottom group includes issues related to employees' personal experience with telework. To the right of the percentage is essentially results shown in a mean average rating for the issue. So ratings with higher numbers were more significant issues than were those with lower numbers. So as you can see, technology space at home and productivity management and coordination really didn't seem to be very significant issues for most employers. However, respondents indicated several significant issues with employees' experience with telework during the pandemic. More than 4 in 10 said employees had encountered issues with child or dependent care. Almost a quarter said that the employees had experienced isolation and missed going to the workplace. And 17% had experienced conflict with a spouse or partner while teleworking during the pandemic. Next slide. I'm just going to give you some additional benefits that employers basically said managers reported. So nearly 3 in 10 noted greater workplace productivity and increased communication with workers during the pandemic. Next slide. We also found that 92% of employers said employees reported benefits of working from home. And really, the greatest benefits were on not having to commute, a more comfortable work environment, and personal cost savings. Next slide. And then 3 in 10 organizations had said they received some telework information assistance, but really half of them who received that assistance really named an internal or corporate source. So it could have been their IT department or maybe their facilities management folks or their HR departments. Next slide. And so here are the key highlights from the survey. We had a good cross-section of employers that responded with regards to location, size, and type of industry. And the average share of employees who telework grew from 36 to 82% at sites with telework already in place. And telework was a widely applied strategy to maintain business operations during the pandemic. And again, this harkens back to other situations we've had in the region with continuity of operations. And then nearly all of the respondents said at least some employees were teleworking since the start of the pandemic. More than half said that all employees teleworked all of their work days. Next slide. More than 60% of respondents said that their organizations had some type of a formal telework policy or program in place before the pandemic. And over 60% of those sites with the telework program policy made changes to accommodate for the pandemic. And a lot of that had to do with expanding telework eligibility. Next slide. Over 90% of the respondents said their organizations anticipated continuing telework after the stay-at-home restrictions are lifted and employees could return to their work locations. And 20% said they would most likely continue telework at the level during the pandemic. And then we had 7 in 10 respondents said that their organizations had considered at least 1 work hours or commute travel action. And that include flexible or staggered work hours, or some type of a compressed work week schedule. Next slide. More than 40% said their employees had encountered issues with child or dependent care. Almost a quarter said their employees had experienced isolation and missed going to the office. And 17% had experienced conflict while teleworking during the pandemic. A lot of that had to do with, other folks maybe having to telework, and maybe somebody was already teleworking, or maybe they had students coming back from college, or maybe students that were in K through 12 that had to also basically get their education online. Almost 90% of the respondents cited benefits they had heard employees express about their telework experience during the pandemic, and about half of respondents noted benefits that they heard managers express about their experience as well. Next slide. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Your timing is impeccable, Nick. Really, that's very interesting. Are there any questions for Nick? We'll start with the district. Marilyn?
Just a very quick question. This is Casey from Tacoma Park. It looked like when you reported where the employers were from, the percentage for DC was much lower than Virginia and Maryland. And I was just wondering if that is typical. That it seems like I would have expected actually somewhat of the opposite, but I'm not sure if I'm overthinking this.
Are you talking about the number of respondents from DC?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was much lower than what we saw in Maryland and Virginia. And again, I think a lot of that has to go back to us just having a really difficult time getting through to employers and just getting someone to respond.
Thanks. Thanks. Anyone from Maryland, else from Maryland? And Virginia?
Madam Chair, Dave Snyder, just two quick questions. First of all, I think this survey is hugely important and very helpful. But the question I have is, did you get any impressions about transit use? We've heard that some employers and some businesses may be suggesting that transit use is not safe, yet the evidence is to the contrary. And secondly, while employers indicated they would continue telework programs, did they give you an indication they would continue them at the level of teleworking that we saw during the pandemic, and what their projections were following the pandemic in terms of percentages of employees continuing to telework? Thank you.
Okay, great questions. On the first, we didn't really ask anything about transit use regarding this particular survey because it's really mainly focused on telework. However, with regards to what would happen after the pandemic, I think the general sense was that most employers are going to continue some type of telework. About 20% said, yeah, we're going to continue doing what we're doing right now. And then others said, well, you know, we're probably going to go to the office and we'll have some kind of a split between, you know, some people working from home and some, you know, some hours in the office. So it was, but the general sense is that there would be increased telework. You know, whether folks were going back to the office or not. Very few said we're not going to really continue telework. It was only 8%.
So, Mr. Snyder, this is Kanti. On that question, as you can see on the slide, you know, 20% have indicated, at least back in July, that they anticipated continuing at the pandemic level, which is really very high. So, but mindful that this survey was done in July when we were right in the midst, and we are still in the pandemic. So, but the next one, 37, said that there would be more than pre-pandemic level. So I think the reality is somewhere in that 37%. When we come out of this, meaning when there is a vaccine or what have you, when that level of personal health threat is considerably reduced, what will stick from a longer term perspective. That's why we have additional surveys planned over the next 2 years. With regards to your first question, I mentioned in my report that Greater Washington Partnership surveyed their employers and they've released the results, and the memo that we provided has the link to that survey report. That survey did ask what was the perception about use of public transportation, and in that survey there was an indication that there remained some concern about using public transportation, and I quite agree with you that the proof to date is quite to the contrary. I think it's perfectly understandable why there are that perceptions of safety, but it is not currently borne out by data, which means we just need to continue to educate both employers and the public about the relative safety of using public transportation.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions from Virginia or WMATA or anyone else?
I have a question.
Who's this?
Bob Brown?
Mr. Brown, yes.
Okay, so I know at the beginning it was said that this was a fairly small sample size, you know, and as the memo indicates, it's more like a focus group than a statistically representative sample. So is TPB going to go, you know, I have not had a chance to compare this to the other survey Conte mentioned. So I don't know if the results track the same, but are you going to go back and try to conduct this survey with a larger group than the 4% that was mentioned in this?
Yeah, we don't have plans to resurvey on this particular topic. There are other surveys that we will be conducting that will add to the knowledge base in terms of how individuals are looking at telework. We have a placement rate survey that's going to be coming up, as well as our state of the commute survey, which we'll be conducting in 2022. And so those surveys, along with the retention rate survey that we have, will give us some additional data points that will add to this knowledge base that we have here.
So would you still categorize this as more of a focus group? You know, you were talking to people who were I think you mentioned this at the technical committee meeting. You were talking to people who were who were maybe teleworking already or in the office. So again, I just like to, get an idea as to this, how significant this is based on the small sample size.
Well, we didn't, as I mentioned earlier, we didn't calculate a confidence level for this, mainly because we just didn't feel comfortable that, the results would, we'd be able to basically say it's plus or minus, 2% or 4%. And a lot of that really had to do with the fact that some employers we just couldn't reach. They were either closed down completely, or maybe the person that we were trying to reach was no longer with the company. We weren't able, and we tried different ways of getting to each of these companies, either through phone or mail or email, if we had the email. So just the response level, which I just wasn't satisfied with the response level. But nonetheless, there is good information here, and you can look at it as good qualitative information. And yeah, you could look at this as a large focus group. And the information is, I wouldn't say it's invalid, but it's just some good nuggets of information here that you could walk away with and say, yeah, there's definitely going to be some additional teleworking going on after the pandemic. There were definitely some concerns at the work sites with childcare and other areas that people couldn't address. And most people said, yeah, this is beneficial for us because we saved costs, we were more productive, and it all worked out really well. So I think those are probably some key takeaways.
So, Ms. Chair, just to add, Stacy Cook mentioned earlier that we will be doing a public opinion survey that will indeed be statistically significant at the county level and the major cities level. That will have some questions about COVID, the pandemic, and use of alternate modes of travel as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for that information. I would just like to remind everybody that September 22nd is Car-Free Day. And if there's nothing else, our next meeting is scheduled for October 21st. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Ms. Chair, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.